So here we are then at the Martanda temple in Matan in Kashmir, which is the starting point for our discussion for today. This temple is dedicated to the sun god, to Surya, and is one of the most magnificent temple ruins in India. It is ruined because it was brought down deliberately during a certain phase in Kashmiri history. But it is also the starting point for us to try and figure out what happened here and what happened around it to create the circumstances where the temple was built. It was built in 735. So if we ask ourselves, who was it who built it? We get an answer. We have a very specific individual in mind, and that was Lalitaditya Muktapida of the Karkota dynasty. But how did Lalitaditya get the money? How did he get the military power to hold off all the people who were in Kashmir or around Kashmir at that time? Why did he dedicate this temple to the Surya Dev rather than to Vishnu or to Shiva, or even build a shrine to the Buddhists? Because he is known to have done many of those as well. And finally, what were the conditions that allowed him the peace and quiet and solitude necessary, and to be allowed to accrue the kind of craftsmen and master craftsmen and masons and architects who would necessarily have to be assembled to build a temple of this size? Now, if we look at those questions, we find that we have to look for the answers within Indian history, not at this location alone, but at what happened around and about as well. And we actually have to keep delving deeper and deeper until we get to the point which is shown in this slide, which is a picture of how Homo sapiens got to India in the first place. Now, this shows how the 135 families in East Africa populated the whole world. It does not claim that Homo sapiens was a unique and single species. It does accept the fact, although it is not illustrated here, that there were other hominids like the Denisovans or like Neanderthal man, about whom we all know, who existed parallel to Homo sapiens and who in fact were absorbed or killed off by Homo sapiens. But we are concerned here about how they got to India. And as the timeline will show you, it is probably as early as 70,000 years, but later dates have been suggested right down to 40,000 years. So somewhere between 70,000 and 40,000 years, these African families hugging the coastline, going around the coast of Arabia, crossing over into what today we call Iran, and going across the Makran coast right up to the South Indian coast and around the whole coastline of India before moving on to Southeast Asia or into Australasia. So this is how humankind first came into South Asia. But was that the first or the last one? It was the first. It certainly was not the last. Because the next thing that happened, if we look at the next slide, we will find that there was a mysterious civilization that was brought up over there, and that we call today the Indus Valley civilization. And it extended over a huge mass, a huge area, right up from Lothal somewhere in the vicinity of the Gulf of Cambay, all the way up the Indus River and up its tributary, the Ghagra, right into Punjab, where we find Harappa. So this Mohenjo-daro Harappa culture, or the Indus Valley culture, is one about which we know very little. We do not know the language they spoke. We cannot understand the script that they used for their seals and for other written artifacts. We do not know how they were administered, because although the mature phase, as can be seen in this slide, shows that it was mature probably between 2000, 2400 to 1900, 2600 actually to 1900, about 700 years. But before 2600, there was another long period of growth, and it is not unfair to say that the Indus Valley civilization went on from 3300 BC at its very earliest to 1300 BC at its very latest, when everybody had evacuated the cities and gone off to the neighboring villages and towns. So this was the extent of that civilization, which was contemporary with Egypt and with Babylon and all the Mesopotamian cities about which we know so much. But then this was only the second. There was a third incursion. This was set up incidentally of people from the Iranian and Afghan plateaus who came down the slopes to the Indus River, mingled and intermarried with the hunter-gatherers who had developed themselves since the time that mankind came in here from Africa. And they formed, this mixed race formed the people who built the Indus Valley civilization. So from there, we go to the third incursion. And okay, before that, let us take a look at one of the most glorious buildings, which was part of the Indus Valley civilization. And these are the ruins of Mohenjo-daro, the Mound of the Dead, in the province of Sindh. But there are other equally admirable examples of the Indus Valley civilization, for instance, at Harappa. However, leaving that aside, we come to the third incursion we had, which was of a people who spoke Indo-Aryan and who originated in the steppes beyond the Hindu Kush. When they, about 2000 BC, or maybe in the period 2500 to 2000 BC, what had happened was the people living there who spoke a language, a primitive language which no longer exists, called Indo-Iranian. And it was common to both the languages that we speak in South Asia today and modern day Persian. It was a common ancestor. But in the first instance, between 1900 to approximately 1000 or slightly later, people had come in. First, they came into a place called Swat. And in Swat, we find the Gandhara graveyard culture, where we find that it was a combination of people who came in from outside and people who were always there, right through. In other words, descendants, sons of the soil. It is possible that there were two waves of migration, one in 1900 of people who spoke Indo-Aryan but did not follow the Vedic religion, and one in 1500 of people who followed both the religion as well as the language group. When we move to cemetery age grave culture, however, there is no such controversy because it is well understood that over there were only two groups. One was possibly the descendants of the Harappan civilization, of the Indus Valley civilization. The other were these migrants who had come in from the steppes. Now, apart from the archaeology that grave sites gives us, we also have the lessons that archaeology tells us based on examination of the pottery sherds that go into the making of all the wares in a village or a town before other synthetic materials came in. Now, these pottery shards exist in four different ways, four different layers. The bottommost layer, and one that ran on side by side with other layers, was the red and black, the black and red culture. That gave way to something called, even before that, there was the ochre colored pottery. That was the oldest, and that was part of the Bronze Age, that was part of the Indus Valley civilization, and it was the last of the Bronze Age potteries. The next layer, black and red ware, actually spanned the gulf between Bronze Age and Iron Age because it continued for such a long time that it saw the replacement of copper for implements with iron. So that was a situation where this pottery was very long-lived and went right up to the end in some parts of India. However, in northern India, in the area that we are scrutinizing so carefully, the next step up was painted grey culture, painted grey ware. And this probably represents, although archaeologists would object strongly to this kind of linking, as far as the historians are concerned, this probably expresses very well the period of domination of the Kuru Panchal tribe, who more or less held sway in northern India in those very early times. But after painted grey ware, we have northern black polished ware, which never goes west of the Indus, but had populated the whole of northern India before that. Now, after northern black polished ware, we do not take into account pottery in historical records. This was necessary because we had to resort to prehistory rather than to history. We had to resort to means such as archaeology of this sort, numismatics, and similar things. Finally, we have a situation where we do not any longer look at pottery because we have come to the stage where northern black polished ware is about at the same time as the Buddha in 600 BC or Mahavira Jain also in 600 BC. And from then onwards, there is an historical thread which we can follow. Earlier, at this stage, it was not possible to follow any kind of historical trend without extrapolating whatever information we had on the ground. Now it was possible to see what was the sequence of rulers and how did it come about.